Hi, I'm Claire. And yeah, you're not misreading that. My brother's $80,000 engagement dinner was held at my restaurant. Not a restaurant I'd heard of. Not one I'd been to once or twice. Mine. The one I built from a single location with a broken walk-in freezer and a maxed-out credit card into the most talked-about dining group in Nashville. And when my brother saw me walk through those doors, he turned to his fiancée's mother and said, "Don't worry. She's just here to help with the kitchen." He said it like I was staff. He said it like I was invisible. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that my parents were sitting right there at that table, and neither of them said a word. The last time I'd been back to Knoxville was Thanksgiving, and even that had been a mistake. My mother had spent most of the meal talking about my brother's new apartment in Atlanta, how the ceilings were high and the neighborhood was up and coming, how his girlfriend, now fiancée, came from a good family. Real estate, old money, the kind of people who didn't need to explain themselves in rooms. I'd sat there cutting my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, while my father nodded along, and my brother, Derek, smiled that smile he'd perfected over 30 years wide enough to look warm, tight enough to say nothing real was happening underneath it. I'd driven back to Nashville that same night. Told myself it was because of an early meeting. That was half true. So when my phone rang on a Thursday afternoon in late April, and I saw Mom on the screen, I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to it while standing at my kitchen counter, still in my work clothes, a glass of red wine already open. "Claire, honey, Derek's engagement dinner is coming up, and I just wanted to let you know it's going to be at that restaurant in the Gulch, the nice one, Maison 44. He and Priya picked it themselves. Isn't that something? Her parents are flying in from Connecticut. It would mean a lot if you could come. We all want to be together for this." I set down the wine. Maison 44. I owned Maison 44. I didn't call my mother back that night. I sat with it instead, the way you sit with something that hurts in a specific and familiar way. Not sharp, not new, just the same old bruise pressed in the same old spot. Derek had booked a private event at my flagship restaurant without knowing it was mine. Or maybe without caring to find out. He'd put down a deposit through our events team, gone through the normal channels, signed the paperwork under a name I'd registered as an LLC 6 years ago, 44 Hospitality Group. Not my name. Never my name on anything public-facing. I'd learned early that women in the restaurant industry got taken less seriously when their face was attached to the brand, so I'd kept it quiet. Built the reputation first. Let the food speak. Derek didn't know. My parents didn't know. As far as they were concerned, I ran some kitchen stuff in Nashville and drove a sensible car and lived in a house that didn't announce itself. My brother had once described my career at Christmas dinner as "Claire does the cooking thing." He'd meant it as a compliment, I think. That was the part that stayed with me longest. My operations director, Simone, called me the next morning before I'd even had coffee. "You have a VIP private booking for the last Saturday of May," she said. "Full buyout of the private dining room. 80,000, all inclusive. The contact name on the file is a Derek Alderman." "I know," I said. She paused. "Do you want me to do anything with it?" "Not yet. Leave it exactly as it is." Another pause. "Claire, I'm fine," I said. "Just document everything from here forward." She knew better than to push. Simone had worked with me for 4 years. She had a gift for reading a room before she walked into it. She said okay, and I heard the quiet click of her already opening a new folder on her desktop. I went through the next 2 weeks on autopilot. We had a soft opening for our second location in East Nashville, a wine dinner for a private client, interviews with 2 new sous chefs. My hands stayed busy. My chest stayed tight. The tightness wasn't about the money. It wasn't even really about Derek. It was about the particular exhaustion of being overlooked by the people who were supposed to know you best, and the way that exhaustion compounds over time, interest on a debt nobody ever acknowledges. I thought about calling my mother and just telling her, "Hey Mom, that restaurant Derek picked? That's mine. I own it. Have for 3 years. You've driven past it on your way to Whole Foods." But I didn't. Because I knew exactly how that conversation would go. She would say, "Oh, isn't that a funny coincidence?" And then she would somehow make it about how helpful it was that I could make sure the food was good for Derek's dinner. She wouldn't mean anything cruel by it, That was almost the harder part, the way the diminishment was always framed as love. A week before the dinner, Derek texted me directly. First time in 2 months. Hey, Mom said you're coming to the engagement thing. Cool. Priya's parents are pretty formal, so just dress nice, okay? Her dad's a big deal. I stared at the message for a long time. Dress nice. I was the woman who had been named one of Nashville's top restaurateurs 2 years running. I had been invited to speak at the James Beard Foundation. I owned the room his engagement dinner was happening in. Sure, I typed back. See you there. That night, I found myself in the back of my own pantry, standing in front of a shelf of dried pasta and olive oil. I never had time to use, thinking about something that happened when I was 12. My parents had enrolled me in a cooking class at the community center. Just a summer thing, nothing serious, and I'd come home one afternoon genuinely electric about it. I'd learned how to make a proper beurre blanc. I was 12, and I had made beurre blanc, and I wanted to make it for the whole family for dinner. My mother had smiled at me from the couch and said, "That's sweet, honey, but Derek has a game tonight, so let's just do pizza." Derek's game had been a rec league soccer match. He'd scored 0 goals, but we'd had pizza. I hadn't thought about that in years. I reached up and pulled a jar of anchovies off the shelf. Started cooking. It was 11 at night, and I made myself a full pasta dish and ate it standing at the counter and thought, this is mine. This has always been mine. They just never watched long enough to see it. The Saturday of the dinner arrived warm and clear, the kind of Nashville spring evening that makes the city look like it's trying to impress someone. I got to Maison 44 2 hours early, walked the room with Simone, checked the florals, tasted the amuse-bouche we'd developed specifically for the event, approved the table arrangement. The private dining room looked exactly like what it was: beautiful, considered, and expensive. Orchids on the sideboards. Candlelight that hit the glassware just right. My executive chef, Marcus, had pulled together a menu that was half Southern, half coastal Indian, a quiet nod to Priya's background that nobody had asked for, but that I'd requested specifically because it mattered. I'm going to be in the building the whole time, I told Simone. But I'm going to come in late. Give them 20 minutes to settle. She nodded. Where do you want to be positioned when you enter? Through the main dining room, I said. Not the side door. She wrote something on her tablet and looked up. You sure about this? I adjusted the cuff of my blazer. Yes. I went upstairs to my small office above the kitchen and waited. Below me, I could hear the ambient hum of the restaurant filling up, the clink of glasses, the low burn of conversation. Through the security monitor on my desk, I watched the private dining room come to life. Priya's parents arrived first. Her father, a tall man named Richard, who moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once been kept waiting, and her mother, Diane, who wore a single strand of pearls and scanned the room with quick, assessing eyes. They were followed by Priya herself, genuinely lovely, a little nervous in the way that suggested she understood what tonight meant. And then, Derek and my parents, my mother in her church blazer, my father looking like he wanted to be somewhere quieter. Derek was already talking by the time they sat down. I watched him on the monitor gesture around the room. See, I told you, isn't this place amazing? Great find, right? He said it like he'd discovered it, like he'd carved the tables himself. Priya's mother looked around and asked something I couldn't hear. Derek shook his head, said something, pointed toward the kitchen. Her father tilted his head. My mother smiled. I turned off the monitor and came downstairs. I walked through the main dining room at a normal pace. Guests at nearby tables glanced up the way you glance at someone who carries themselves like they belong to a room not performing, just present. Simone was near the entrance to the private dining room. She caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. I stepped inside. The conversation didn't stop immediately. It tapered Derek mid-sentence. Priya turning first, her parents following. My mother's smile going slightly uncertain. My father setting down his water glass. Derek's face did something complicated. Claire, hey. I didn't know you were. How did you get back here? I looked at him for a moment, and then I turned to Priya's father and extended my hand. Richard, I said. I'm Claire Alderman. I own this restaurant. Welcome to Maison 44. I hope the evening has been everything you were hoping for. The room was very quiet. Richard shook my hand. His grip was firm and deliberate. He said, You're the owner. I am, I said, and the founder of 44 Hospitality Group. We have 2 locations now, with a 3rd opening in the fall. Diane looked at me with a particular kind of sharpness that I recognized the look of a woman who had spent decades evaluating rooms and people in them. You built this, she said. It wasn't really a question. From the ground up, I said. Derek had gone the color of old putty. But you never said he started, and then stopped, and tried again. You work here? I live here, I said, and I meant it more than he could understand. This is mine. My mother made a small sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. She said, "Oh, Claire, why didn't you ever tell us?" And there it was. Not I'm proud of you. Not I had no idea you'd built something like this. Just why didn't you tell us? As if the silence had been something I'd done to them. I didn't answer her directly. I pulled out the chair beside Diane and sat down, and I said, "Marcus, our executive chef has put together something special for tonight. I hope you'll let me walk you through the menu." Richard leaned forward with his elbows on the table and looked at me the way I imagined he looked at people he was genuinely interested in. "How long have you been in Nashville?" he asked. 8 years, I said. Started in someone else's kitchen. Bought my first space when I was 27. Diane set her wine glass down. 27. It was a long year, I said, and she laughed a real laugh, warm and short, the kind that meant she'd been somewhere difficult herself once and recognized the understatement. Derek cleared his throat. "Yeah, so Claire kind of keeps to herself about this stuff," he said. "She's always been the quiet type in the family." He said it like it was a personality trait. Like the years of not asking, not looking, not wondering what I was actually doing. Like all of that was my quietness. My choice to stay invisible. Priya turned and looked at her fiancé with an expression I'd call unreadable if I didn't notice the very slight stillness in her jaw. Then she looked at me and said, "I've actually read about you. There was a piece in Nashville Scene 2 years ago about the 44 group. I remember thinking whoever built this had a real vision." I smiled at her. "Thank you. I meant it." The dinner moved forward. Marcus sent out course after course, and each one landed the way good food lands, when someone has really thought about the person eating it, not showily, not loudly, but with a specific kind of care that speaks for itself. Richard asked me questions about sourcing, about the design of the space, about what it had taken to open the second location. Diane told me about a restaurant she'd loved in Charleston years ago, and I knew exactly which one she meant, and we talked about why certain rooms hold their atmosphere longer than others. It was the most genuinely good conversation I'd had at a family event in a decade. My father was quiet for most of it. He ate carefully and refilled his water glass several times, and at one point, he looked across the table at me with an expression that I couldn't name, not pride exactly, not regret exactly, something between the two that live in the same unlit hallway. Derek tried to recover. He mentioned that he'd always known I was serious about food. He mentioned that he'd told Priya's parents how accomplished his sister was. I let it pass without comment. It wasn't worth the energy, and I wasn't there to make him look worse. I was just there. That was enough. After dessert, Richard excused himself to make a call, and Diane touched my arm lightly before she stood up. She said, "This was a remarkable evening, Claire. I want you to know that. You should be very proud." I said thank you, and I meant that too. In the hallway outside the dining room, I passed Derek on my way back toward the kitchen. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at a framed photograph on the wall, one of the original team from opening night, 4 years ago, all of us tired and delirious, and grinning in the kitchen. He said, "Why didn't you ever say anything to us about any of this?" I stopped. I thought about it for a moment, and then I said it as plainly as I knew how. "I did say things, Derek. You just weren't listening." He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't need him to. I went back into the kitchen and stood there for a while, surrounded by the heat and the noise and the smell of something beautiful being made, and I felt not triumphant, not vindicated in the sharp way I might have expected. Just solid, like I was standing on something that had been there the whole time, real and steady, and I had simply stopped pretending it wasn't mine. 3 days after the dinner, my father called me. I almost didn't pick up. Then, I did. "Claire," he said. He paused for a long time. I've been thinking. About the other night. I waited. I didn't know you'd built all that. I should have known. I should have asked more. I'm sorry I didn't ask more. It was 8 words of actual apology, buried in a longer sentence, but I heard them. I said, I know, Dad. There was another silence, and then he said, that Diane woman. She told Richard on the way out that if they ever expand to Hartford, they should talk to you about a partnership. I smiled at the kitchen wall. I'll keep that in mind, I said. A week passed. Then 2. Simone came into my office one morning, with her tablet and her usual expression of barely concealed amusement. She said, Priya's sister just submitted a private inquiry for a bridal shower booking. She asked specifically if the owner would be involved in the planning. Of course she did, I said. We'll take great care of her. Simone raised an eyebrow. And Derek? I looked out the window at the street below. The city was moving the way it always does forward, without asking permission. What about him? He texted asking if we could have lunch sometime. At the restaurant, I leaned back in my chair. Tell him to book through the normal reservation system, I said. And tell him the kitchen says hello. Simone smirked and walked out. I stayed at my desk for a while longer, watching nothing in particular out the window. Derek would find his way eventually. Maybe. My mother would continue doing what my mother does. Loving imperfectly, expecting silently, meaning well in the specific way that still manages to cost you something. My father had said sorry, briefly, imperfectly, and I'd taken it for what it was. A beginning, not a completion. None of that was the ending I used to imagine when I was 23 and exhausted and just trying to make rent while building something from scratch in a city that didn't know my name yet. Back then, the ending I imagined was the one where someone in my family finally saw me, really saw me, and acknowledged it out loud in a room full of people. I used to think that was what I needed, the acknowledgement, the witness. But here's what I know now. Richard and Diane had seen me clearly without knowing me for more than 2 hours. Priya had found an article about my work years before she ever met me. Marcus, who had cooked beside me through a kitchen fire and a staff walkout and a pandemic and 3 different inspections, he'd known exactly who I was since the 2nd year. The people who were paying attention had always been paying attention. The ones who weren't, well, that was never really about me. So if you're listening to this, and you've spent years building something that the people closest to you have never bothered to look at, I want you to hear this. The work is real. It is there. It speaks even when you don't. You don't need them to read the room for the room to exist. You don't have to shrink to be loved. And you don't have to announce yourself to take up space. I built something beautiful, and I did it quietly, and I did it in a city where nobody had given me a head start. And one Saturday evening, my brother booked a table at it to impress someone else, and he had no idea. And when the truth came out, I didn't need to say a single sharp word. The room said it for me. That's the thing about building something real. Eventually it speaks. Have you ever felt like the people who were supposed to see you the clearest were the last ones to actually look? Tell me in the comments. I mean it. I want to know. And if this story found you at the right moment, you know what to do. See you in the next one.